everyone. Para akong kinabahan sa pagsasalita ni Mr. Sanchez. Tumabog ang dibdib. Parang naranasan ko na naman yung mga nangyari sa akin noong araw. The fear of getting caught, the cold sweat, palpitations, the nausea and the dizziness that follow. If I vomit during this talk, I hope you understand. But so I'm going to talk to you this morning. I was asked to share my experiences growing up in this school. Those were probably the best years of my life. I think most high school graduates will say that. And it's remarkable how things haven't changed. I walk around the classroom this morning. The corridors look the same. Classrooms have the same ambiance. Everything seems so familiar. Even the smells are the same. Especially the bathroom, you can go there. It brings back so many memories. I'd like to start by sharing with you a poem that I remembered from high school. It's by Alfred Hausmann, and it's called "With Whom My Heart Is Laden." And I find it strange that I can remember it today. It goes like this, it's very quick. With whom my heart is laden, for golden friends I had, for many a rose-lipped maiden, and many a light-foot lad. By brooks too broad for leaping, the light-foot lads are laid. The rose-lipped maids are sleeping in fields where roses lay. It was on page 519 of my third-year English book. And the only reason I remember it is because it was my job for so many years. My beloved English teacher, Father James O'Brien, he held lively English classes and we loved him dearly. But if you got too rowdy or got carried away, he would point at you without looking at you and say, 519, my friend, 100 times. And I was judged so often that 32 years later, I still remember this. It had no significance to me. It's a poem about dead friends. And all my friends were alive. But that was 32 years ago. And now it has some meaning for me. I actually know some of these light-foot lads who have been laid by brooks too broad for leaping. And so I realized why I've been invited here this morning. and that's because, you name it, I've broken it. You name the punishment, it's been considered for me. I've been jabbed and posted. I've been suspended. I've been even considered for expulsion. And it is I live to tell the tale today, obviously. And I'm a proud survivor of the penal, not the penal, the rule book. There are three things I'd like to talk about this morning very quickly. I'd like to talk about the school, because this is where I learned discipline, resiliency, and excellence. Then I'd like to talk about how my parents reacted or responded to things I did in school. And then third, give you a perspective of how all this has affected my perspective about being a parent. Okay, so first about the school. Do you know what this is? It's a post. It's a rare photo of a post. I don't know how someone took it, hidden camera siguro. But for those of you, how many of you know what a post is? Okay, well, for those who don't, a post is when you're made to stand up after classes for an hour in the corridor between the library and the administration building. I probably have my footprints there. You're just made to stand there by an hour, and in the old times, if what you did was really great, you would be made to do it facing the sun. So that's why my skin is like this. I don't know the origins of the post. There are rumors that it came the pillory of medieval times, you know. It was a form of public embarrassment and a form of physical punishment. But it characterizes the Ateneo education in high school. I don't know if it's done in any other school. I don't think. No. But I learned many things from being posted, and my class did also. There was a time our whole class was posted. We had a chalk war during class. Wala kasing mga video games ng araw, no? So we had to invent our own video games, and chalks were very exciting weapons. Kasi if you throw them well and make them the appropriate size, pag tinamaan mo yung kalaban mo, sumasabog yun eh. And it stings, no? Especially if it hits bony parts. So, we were having every class had chalk wars, but one unfortunate chalk war we had. A teacher passed by and looked at what the commotion was. And one of my classmates hurled a piece of chalk, umilag yung binabato niya. Tinamaan siya dito sa noo at sumabog yung chalk. The next day, our whole class was posted. I can just try to recreate my memory of what it must have looked like when a whole class being sent to post. Now, I think there were so many ways of getting posted or judged or suspended. There were small crimes like you're not submitting a paper, being late, being noisy in class, and then there were big crimes, like I suppose the chalk war was a big crime. We hurt somebody there, and then truancy, which I will tell you about later. Then there were even strange crimes, big crimes, small crimes. There were strange crimes. Once we were caught having a long distance speaking contest. I will not tell you the name of my classmate. But this guy, we had a line kasi we would run and then speak as far as we can. We did this during break. And ang layo, I think we did about 12 meters or something. Now, Mr. Paul Mata caught us and he said, stop that. And we all looked at each other. It was after class. We didn't know exactly what it was we were violating. But we must have been violating something, and I could see from his eyes that he was also thinking. There must be something wrong here. And we were all afraid that we were going to be posted or jailed. But he ended up just saying, stop that. That's disgusting. And it was now in retrospect. And I'm sorry I had to share it with you. But to me, it highlights many things. The remarkable thing about discipline in this school is not that there are rules controlling errors in behavior, but that errors are tolerated at all. School, after all, and childhood, after all in general, is a time to commit errors. And one of my fears about my children right now is whether they've failed enough in school. I'm afraid that there are a lot of A students. Because A students succeed in class, they behave perfectly, they have never been scolded probably, and they've never failed in anything. And my greatest fear for my children is if they graduate in that state, they may not be strong enough to face failures in real life. We discovered ourselves in this school, and a big part of that discovery or that development was being allowed to make mistakes. Within limits, we were allowed to rebel. My parents allowed it, the school allowed it, and well, we tested the boundary between what was acceptable and unacceptable so many times and had discussions in class about it. some examples that come to my mind, not really misdemeanors, but we were challenging the norm. We were asked once to submit an essay on the movie Tinimbang Kang Ngunit Kulang by Lino Rojas, revolutionary film for our Filipino class. Nagrebelde ako for no reason. I wrote a letter, sabi ko, well, I guess I did have a reason. When we watch movies at home, you pay for it using your own allowance. And it was the last movie I wanted to watch at the time. So I wrote a letter to a Filipino teacher and said, I think this is a violation of my right to choose what I will watch. So can I just watch what I want to watch and write about it? So medyo natulirong ganun yung teacher. Sabi niya, oh, sige. So I watched Magnum Force by Clint Eastwood. So I twisted essay in Tagalog on its social relevance. And of course, I failed. Another time, I was asked to write an essay on something you consider valuable in your life. Father Richard Kogan, then Father Richard Kogan asked us to write it. And everyone wrote something about discipline and wisdom and learning. I wrote about the Brown Derby. Do you know what a Brown Derby is? For those of you who have lived long enough, they serve it in Magnolia ice cream kiosk. It's one of the best preparations, and I wrote this essay about the cacophony of succulent flavors that poured in that single mug. It was my way of rebelling, and he gave me an A for that essay. So he was open, and he actually read the essay in class, and we all had a good laugh about what I considered valuable. But these things about mischiefs, misdemeanors, if you go to high school reunions, you'll notice this is what people like to talk about. Because this is what we learned from. I have ventured to say, when I was asked to speak before the graduating high school class this year, about how I thought most of the learning occurred outside the classroom, and that our grades could not capture everything in an individual, in a student. Grades measure knowledge, mostly. It fails miserably at being able to measure creativity, which I think is more important. Grades tell us about conduct, how you conform to expected norms of behavior. But after school, we don't honor people who conform, we honor people who rebel, who change things, right? And the other thing we measure is effort. Sabi ko yung mahirap mag-measure ng effort eh. Kasi if you're good in math, hindi effortless ay yung math. Di ba dapat pagsak ka sa effort in math? Rather than measure effort, I suggested what we should be trying to develop is passion. Kasi effort takes energy, passion builds energy. So my whole message then was to the children, to the graduating class, including my son. Doesn't matter if you're at the top of the class or at the bottom of the class. Don't believe your grades, because you're far better than what it says. And that's the truth of measurement of grades. I don't think anyone can deny that. I received a lot of emails and letters, most of them from parents of failing children. I felt very, very sad. I received an email from a mother who said, "Thank you very much for the wonderful speech. If you made it, I guess anyone can make it." Okay, I'll accept that. Well, to make the long story short, my first message about school is that I was a problem at school. I was a big problem at school. And I'm thankful about the implementation process for disciplinary problems, because it made me learn from my mistakes. And I felt that was more important than the lessons I learned inside the classroom. Now let me talk about how my family coped with it. Those are my parents beside me. I'm on the far right, and the two people beside me are my mother and father. I was the fifth of 10 kids. My mother was an art teacher and my father was a civil engineer. And they were both disciplinarians. But the curious thing for me about their discipline was that they rarely shouted at us, despite everything that I deserved to be shouted at for. And they rarely resorted to corporal punishment. How they did this was a mystery to me, and I suppose to themselves too. But two events for me defined the kind of discipline I received. First was this. Once I was sitting down, memorizing acronyms in class. I think many of us did through education like this, like the OTC, Department of Transportation and Communication, PCHRT, Philippine Council for Health Research and Development, LPC is the Land Transportation Commission. And I said in exasperation, Mom, I can't memorize this. And I don't think I should memorize this yet. I just understand what these institutions are rather than memorize these acronyms. And she told me, son, I allow you to fail that subject because I think I agree with you on that aspect. And that's what I did. I failed that. I didn't fail the subject. I failed the exam and tried to make up for it some other way. To me, I was given a choice, and I was held responsible for that choice. She did not come here to complain or to badger the teacher. She said, you make a stand. How do you want to make a stand? Okay, I'm going to fail that exam. I tried it on my daughter. I caught her a few years ago. She went to me, Dad, help me memorize these things. It was exactly the same thing I didn't want to memorize. And remembering what a big impact that had on me, sabi ko, what an opportunity. I'm going to share the same experience I had with my daughter. And I said, alam mo, Nikki, you shouldn't be memorizing those things. Do you think they're important? If you don't think they're important, it's okay. I allow you to fail that subject. Tinignan niya ako masamang ganun. Never mind, I'll ask Mama. I lost the moment there. But I've tried, and it's characterized some of the kinds of parenting I've been trying to do in the past 20 years. The second instance that to me tells me a lot about how my parents disciplined me was when I was truant. I was truant not once, twice, 3 times. I was truant like several days. This building used to be in a field of Talakis. This wasn't here. And when there was a fair in Merinol or there was a holiday in some girls' school, some of my classmates and I, mostly I, would crawl through this and down the Jesuit residence here and then into freedom. We used what we learned in military training, crawl. There was this big guard here, big boy, who must have been 6'2", 300 pounds with a big shotgun, and it was really exciting. But I was called to the principal's office one day, and there were my parents with a solemn look and a pile of excuses were in front of them that they never wrote. And I knew that I was dead. Right? And the things I did out of class were really stupid things. Watching TV with my classmates, going to watch a movie, visiting friends who didn't have class. But my parents didn't shout at me, they didn't whip me. This is what my father said. Of course, here I got suspended, I got considered for expulsion because of forgery. I pleaded my case, apologized, learned my lesson, and I think I had like a month's post. And I was suspended from class for a week, but I was not expelled. At home, this is how my father responded. Sabi niya, son, what do you think is your rightful punishment? So sabi ko, okay ka, papamantir ako, bibida pa ako. Why don't you ground me for 3 months and cancel my allowance. Okay. Dito na ako nagulat, umayag siya. But I had imposed my own standards on myself, and they held me accountable for what I had done. And to me, that characterized the discipline I received at home. It was a kind of discipline they gave to all children, all 10 children. I can't say we all turned out well. This is how we turned out 40 years later, but that's another story. Okay, the third story, the last thing I want to talk about is how the discipline in school and at home translates to what I do now. Our biggest concern as parents today is discipline at various stages of the life of our children. How do you, it can start very small, how do you manage a tantrum? Disobedience, finicky eaters, quarrels, endless arguments among our kids. Like all parents, I underwent on-the-job training for this most important job of our life, which we are never trained for and which we never studied. My wife was always cool and unaffected, and she found us a book that changed our lives as parents, which I would like to share with you. This book is entitled Making Children Mind Without Losing Yours by Dr. Kevin Leman. You can still see the price there, it's $40. We found it on sale at the second-hand book. But a single catchphrase for me in that book captured what I should do as a parent, what my parents were doing, and what the school was doing. And this was an important catchphrase for me because it was easy to remember, easy to implement, and very effective. The phrase was reality discipline. Now, what is reality discipline? Reality discipline is a philosophy which states we don't have to scold our children. We don't have to nag them. We don't have to whip them. Because anything they do has a natural consequence. And if you let them suffer that natural consequence, they will learn from it. And that's the distinction between punishment and discipline. Now, there are 3 steps to implementing it. Number 1, when they do something which you think might be wrong, ask yourself, what's the natural consequence of this act? Number 2, let that natural consequence happen. Do not interfere. The faster it happens, the swifter the justice, the better the lesson. And then the last step, discuss what happened. I got this book when my eldest daughter was 3 years old. We were in Canada training in clinical epidemiology, and my daughter had her tantrum in a supermarket in Canada. How do you handle this? It was my first attempt. What's the natural consequence of a tantrum of when somebody in the real world goes haywire? You isolate, right? So, we said, okay, let's isolate. We're not going to listen to you. This is no way to get our attention. You might even get arrested. So we talked to the police, the guard in the supermarket, and said, could you just pretend to pick up my daughter? And because she's making a lot of noise. We stayed in the other lane of the supermarket while she was rolling on the floor, banging her fists against the floor. And then when the guard came to her, she suddenly stopped. That was the last tantrum she ever had. So you either bend to what they're doing and accommodate their demand and live with it the rest of your life, or stop that behavior now, showing them that you can stop it by letting natural consequences take place. And I did it for my son and my third daughter. And they all had, to my recollection, 1 drop tantrum in their entire life. Now it tells Sohes, later in life, Miguel, my son, who graduated earlier this year from high school. Well, kayong sabihin, pero he had his problems in high school. He was truancy. And I had no moral ascendancy to tell him. So he came home one night and said, Dad, I'm sorry, I'm truancy, I'm being suspended. and there are some punishments with it. So I said so much. He didn't know about this yet. It was one of my gifts to him in graduation, to tell him about my own truancy. And then so I told my wife, you talk to him, because I wasn't sure what to tell him, because I myself had done the same thing. But the book helped us. What's the natural consequence of truancy? Suspension. We allowed it. We said, we're not going to cover up for you and say you were sick. Suffer the consequence. It's good for you. So we never had to lose our temper, never had to shout. That's the wonderful thing about reality discipline. We were at his side, we were his friends. We loved him. We did not make him feel bad or make him feel that we loved him less, because we loved him through the whole punishment. I think it works. But of course, that's why you have our next speaker to tell me it actually does. I wouldn't know if it works for everyone, but I think it's easy to remember and easy to do. It just has two requirements. I have 4 minutes left. It requires, number one, unconditional love. No matter what they do. The extreme example in my mind all the time is, what if my son actually commits a crime that he deserves to go to jail for? Will I still love him? Of course I will. And I still can. And reality discipline says, I should be the one to drive him to jail and to surrender and to accept the consequences of what he did. He may have had a very good reason for doing what he did. And the second condition is constant practice. Every time my children do something which I think might be wrong, from constant practice it becomes instant. What's the natural consequence? You don't want to eat yet? You don't want to like the food? You go hungry. I never had to force them to eat. Okay, fine, that makes no problem to that. You can go up and not eat, but there's nothing else to eat. Okay, and then I'd like to end putting all three together. What I learned in school, at home, and as a parent. And I'd like to share with you something else I remember. Aside from that poem, I remember the prayer of Saint Ignatius. It goes like this: Lord, teach me to be generous. Teach me to serve you as you deserve. To give and not to count the cost. Fight and not to heed the wounds. To toil and not to seek for rest. To labor and not to ask for reward, save that of knowing that I am doing your will. It's a prayer about discipline. Because it takes discipline to be able to do these things that St. Ignatius is praying for. It's a prayer about resilience. Because it takes resilience to give and not count the cost, to fight and not heed the wounds, to toil and not to seek for rest, to labor and not to ask for reward. And it's also, to me, the definition of excellence. I believe that if we discipline our children properly, we will all find out that two things. Number one, the most important lessons are not inside the classroom. They are the lessons outside the classroom. And to me, that's one thing I hope we'll discuss in the open forum. Because our children are so confined in classrooms these days that they don't have a chance to learn from real life. I mean, how many of you allow your children to go on public transportation? It's a big decision for us, right? It's a toss-up between safety on one hand and street smartness on the other hand. So you either have surviving children, living children who are not street smart, or street smart children who are at risk out there in the streets. So that's one thing. I think we cannot force the Ignatian spirit into our children by spanking them or scolding them or shouting at them. We can only nurture it in them by allowing them to learn from the mistakes they make. When you punish a child, he doesn't become resilient. When you shout at him, he doesn't become resilient. He becomes malleable. Baliktad ng resilient yun. Yung malleable, you can shape him any way you want according to your own standards. And other people can do that to him, kasi he will now know that, or think that when somebody shouts at me, I have to follow him. When somebody hurts me, I have to follow that person. And so he becomes an easy victim for peer pressure, and is susceptible to a lot of problems brought about by peer pressure. But when we instill reality discipline, he begins to stand on his own and learn from his own mistakes. He becomes his own person. He becomes resilient. The shape he bounces back to is not the shape we forced him to become, but the shape he wanted to be. So we allow him to set the bar for himself and set standards for himself. And to me, that's the only true definition of excellence. Excellence measured by the standards you've set on your own. So I think that's all I have to say to share with you this morning. Thank you for your attention and the chance to share.